Canestracci here, and I am here to discuss the Melvins Solo EPs from the early 90s. How's that for niche? How's that for specific? Yeah, it's going to be one of my most niche and specific videos ever. And it's awesome because the Melvins are awesome. And in fact, the Melvins video I did about a year or so ago, A Beginner's Guide to the Melvins, is easily my most popular video on my channel. It's got a lot of views, and those numbers just keep climbing and climbing and climbing. So obviously, I filled some kind of vacuum there. Not enough people were talking about the Melvins on YouTube. Well, I'm happy to do it, and that's why I'm doing it again. Plus, that was just a beginner's guide, you know? That was trying to get people that were perhaps into different kinds of music, like maybe if they were more into hard rock or classic rock or heavy metal, trying to get them to get into the Melvins. So that's what that video was all about. Then I was thinking maybe I should do an expert's guide to the Melvins, where I do more of a deep dive and really break down all their albums. But they have so many albums, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should take my time over the next few years and periodically do videos focusing on a specific album or a specific period from this awesome band, a fucking American institution, the Melvins. That's right. And if you don't know anything about the Melvins, check out A Beginner's Guide to the Melvins. I'll leave a link down below. Like Mick Watkins always says, down below. I decided to tackle these EPs because I was rewatching that video, and man, did I not give them a fair shake. You know, I just kind of mentioned them in passing at the end, and I was pretty dismissive of them. Even the one I liked the best, I just kind of said why I liked it in one sentence and just moved on. And then there was one, the Joe Preston EP, it caused a little controversy actually in the comments section. Even though this is generally considered the worst one, and it's the one that most Melvins fans don't like. Buzz Osborne himself doesn't like it. But it does have a cult following, as I discovered. Like almost everything. You can't say one thing that you don't like without someone popping up saying, hey, that's the best thing they ever did. But in this case, a couple of the people that commented on my dismissive attitude towards the Joe Preston EP, it made me dig into him a little bit. And you know what? We're going to talk about that when we get to the Joe Preston EP, alright? Because I decided if I'm going to talk about these three EPs in detail, I'm going to do it in like a ranking order. Because that's more fun, that's more dramatic. And believe it or not, my opinion has changed so much regarding Joe Preston EP that it's not my least favorite. So we're not going to start with it. A true ranking video has to begin with the one you like least, and then you work your way up to the one you like best. Considering there's only 3 EPs here, that shouldn't take too long, but then again, it's me, so who knows? But yeah, so that's the big headline. The Joe Preston EP is no longer my least favorite of the Melvins Solo EPs. Wow, what a shocker. Here's another headline. I love them all now. Yeah, I love every one of these EPs now, and I really regret how I dismissed them. I mean, I wasn't quite as into the more experimental side of the Melvins back when I did that video. You know, I liked, their sludgy, grungy, more accessible side, or the more punk rock side, or their heavier side, whatever you want to call it. But these days, I don't know, something about getting older, I'm starting to like things that are just weirder, more gonzo. There you go, Rich. I said gonzo. Take a drink. I don't know. I'm getting bored of a lot of shit. Like, I'm getting bored of just, like, normal kind of music. So, like, I want my mind to be blown. I want to hear different things. And that's the great thing about a band like the Melvins. They got so many different periods and so many different albums that now that I'm starting to get more into avant-garde music and stuff that's more out there, well, the Melvins already have a lot of stuff like that I kind of neglected before. But now I've been listening to a lot of it. And I'm going to do a lot of videos in the future talking about these different little weird corners that the Melvins had gone to. And when we say Melvins, obviously it's Buzz Osborne and Dale Crover. Those are the only 2 consistent members of the band. That's essentially who the Melvins are. Man, I just love this band, but you already know that. Let's get into these EPs. And my least favorite EP of the 3, but I still love it. But here's the big shocker. It's King Buzzo. That's right, Buzz Osborne himself. You would think that would be my favorite EP, because he's the main songwriter, main singer, and main guitarist of the Melvins. And in fact, you would think this album sounded the most like the Melvins. Some ways it does, some ways it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, I love it. There's only one reason why I give the second one, my second favorite one, the edge on this one. There's one track here that I don't think should be on here for a lot of reasons. It takes it down a notch, just one notch. But I really do love this EP. I've grown to love it a lot. I think it's really interesting. I guess the elephant in the room here is Kiss. Yeah, okay. So obviously these EPs, you can view it as a tribute to Kiss or a parody of Kiss. Well, if you know anything about the Melvins, it's both. Yeah, that's right. Buzz was generally a fan of early Kiss when he was growing up, and Gene Simmons' vocals and a lot of their sludgier stuff, kind of like on this album, Hotter Than Hell, was a big influence on a young King Buzzo. And they also opened for Kiss in the mid-90s, and Gene Simmons was always very supportive of the Melvins. And so it's not as simple as, oh, look, they're like doing a goof on Kiss. But at the same time, Buzz Osborne is a smartass. And he has that punk rock background, and he loved things like Black Flag and that kind of subversive sense of humor. If you're really into a band, sometimes it's even easier to make fun of them, you know? To lampoon something and do it so specifically and so well means you have to be a fan. Like, only a Kiss fan would even think it was funny to do solo EPs in this style. Like, that's the thing. Like, you know, most people, most casual, normal people wouldn't even get it. So I think it's both an homage and at the same time, he's kind of having a laugh at it. And just this idea that these underground punk EPs would be like these overindulgent mainstream late 70s albums put out by Casablanca Records. You know, it's hilarious and it's awesome, and it works simultaneously as a parody and as a tribute. And in a lot of ways, this EP is really kind of both a tribute and a parody specifically to the Gene Simmons solo album, the 78 Gene Simmons solo album. And not just because of the artwork, that great artwork, you know, the blood on the lip, that's mirroring the Gene Simmons solo album. But in addition to the album artwork, there's actually deeper, more subtle ways that this is an homage to the Gene Simmons solo album. Buzz was being a purist here. He's like, it's not just about the album artwork. We're actually going to do in our own way. We're going to be doing what Kiss did in 1978. Now, in 1992, we're going off on our own and treating these like true solo projects. As a result, this is the only Melvins album where you're going to hear Buzz Osborne playing with a different drummer. He's not playing with Dale because it wouldn't be a solo album if he's just playing with Dale. If he was playing with Dale, it'd just be another Melvins album. So he enlists a grunge superstar. That's right. He enlists Dave Grohl of Nirvana. And of course, it was fitting because Dave Grohl joined Nirvana because of Buzz Osborne. That's right. Dave Grohl was a fan of the Melvins first, and he would follow them and see them at gigs, and he was playing with a punk band named Scream, and then he left that band, and then when Nirvana suddenly needed a drummer, it was Buzz Osborne that recommended Dave Grohl to Kurt Cobain and said, you should play with that guy, and he told Dave Grohl, you should play with those guys. So he got them together. So there you go, Dave Grohl. Don't forget that. Never forget that. And I guess he didn't. At least back then in 1991 when they recorded this, he was like, yeah, Buzz is my man. And Buzz hooked me up. So I'm going to hook him up. And he does hook him up with some amazing drumming right out of the gate with Isabella. Woo! Man, I love Dale Crover. But I gotta give credit where credit's due. Dave Grohl's an amazing drummer, and he definitely helped Nirvana take it to the next level when he joined that band. He has a really big, fat John Bonham kind of style, which I love. I always loved his drumming. You hear it right here. He's going forth with that drum beat, and then when fucking Buzz comes in with all that heavy guitar work, man, it's all sludgy and Melvins-like. I love it. Sludgy, awesome, everything I love about the Melvins. And this is coming off of their best album and their best EP from the prior year, 1991. The album Bullhead and the EP Eggnog, which are my two favorite things that the Melvins ever did. Buzz's guitars never sounded more badass. That tone than on that album and EP. And you got a little bit of that here. Sounds great. I always was a little disappointed that this song wasn't longer. Like by the time it kicks in with Buzz's vocals, and they're amazing. Some of his best vocals ever. Woo! He does this crazy ass scream. I love it. This very like next level Gene Simmons style screaming Jay Hawkins kind of savage scream. And it's amazing. I love the sound of his scream over the drums and the guitar, and it's great, but it's almost like the party's just started and the song ends abruptly. Then the EP goes in a drastically different direction. That used to bother me. Doesn't bother me so much now. Now I kind of appreciate, like, he's getting you all into it. He's giving you exactly what you want. But then it's like, nah, we're going to be more punk rock. We're going to be more subversive. I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I'm going to go in some different directions. This soon would be typical of Melvins albums. Melvins albums would include some experimental work, and there'd be some Melvins albums which would be entirely experimental. And at some point, I will do videos about those albums. But this was a pretty major turn for the band at this point, because this was before the Prick album came out, which was their first full-fledged avant-garde record. So you can say that Porg, the second track, Porg is kind of the first full-fledged avant-garde noise song. I'm assuming this is just Buzz by himself. I don't think Dave Grohl had anything to do with this. Starts off with this kind of the sound effect, this kind of rhythm that's going on, and this moaning and groaning, kind of sensual and frightening and horrifying all at the same time. And then this sound of feedback and noise, this ambient noise kind of rising and cresting like a wave. It just keeps building and building, and there's just a real sense of tension and a real sense of menace to it. Even more menacing than you could ever get with traditional heavy metal. As much as I love heavy metal, this is scarier, spookier, and witchier stuff. All in like 4 minutes too. And it's a great track. I used to not like it, but now I love it. I think it's awesome. And in some ways, the fact that it's coming off of Isabella, it's just kind of perfect. It's like a 1-2 punch of, yeah, I'm going to rock you, and now I'm going to fuck your mind. God damn, that's awesome. Then you flip the EP over. Anam. I think that's how you pronounce it. Anam. Anam is another stylistic curveball. It's a song. It's a non-avant-garde piece. It's actually a very haunting, melodic indie rock song. That's what I'd call it, indie rock song. Definitely not grungy or sludgy, not in a typical sense anyway. There's no distortion. There's a little bit at the end. There's a few hits of it at the end. But for the most part, this is clean electric. We have not heard Buzz play clean electric guitar at this point and write a song like this. It's a ballad, I guess. It's in a Buzz Osborne way, it's kind of a ballad. Again, foreshadows stuff that you would hear on later Melvins albums. You would hear some stuff like this on the Bootlicker, for example, had a lot of songs that sound a little like this and also had the clean electric sound. But this is the first time he's doing it. So this is a very innovative release from Buzz in a lot of ways. It foreshadows a lot of directions he'll go later on. And it's a great song. Great song. A strong and understated drum beat that adds a little punchiness to it from Dave Grohl. Also sounds a little like what Dave Grohl would have done with some of the more gentle songs from Nirvana. It has a little bit of that vibe. It has a little bit of a Nirvana vibe to it as well. It's a gloomy song. Even though it's a ballad, it's like a gloomy, dark, atmospheric ballad. And I love it. I think it's a great song. And when it does kind of get a little heavy in spots at the end, it's a great contrast. But it's never overdone, never does anything predictable, but it's a song that kind of stays with you like a dark whisper on an evening breeze. I love the song. It's great. So wow, 3 great songs. Why is this my least favorite solo Melvins EP? Well, it's because of the next track, the last track, Skeeter. Skeeter, it's not that horrible, but it shouldn't be here. And this is complicated, okay? You want to hear some complicated niche underground fucking shit? Okay. Skeeter is actually all Dave Grohl. It's not Buzz Osborne. So that's a big problem I have with it right there. To me, this goes against the whole concept, which for the most part, Buzz was being a purist about. So I don't understand what the hell he was thinking with this. To suddenly slap on something that Dave Grohl did himself, that's actually on another album. It's an underground album that was only released on cassette on the Simple Machines indie label. That's Jenny Toomey, the great Jenny Toomey, who I always had a big crush on and who I love. Her band Tsunami from the 90s, one of the best bands from the 90s. Check out Tsunami if you never did. But this was her label, and Dave had joined Nirvana at this point. Nevermind, I don't think it was out yet, but I do think they had their record deal. So they knew that they were going to be, like, at very least, up a few rungs in the rock and roll hierarchy, although I don't think they realized how big Nevermind was going to be. But they knew they weren't going to be like an underground band anymore. Dave was already emerging as a songwriter, even this early on, which I didn't realize, and he recorded this whole album, kind of like the first Foo Fighters album. He recorded everything on his own. But this is very lo-fi, and in my opinion, best thing Dave Grohl ever did. I love this album, actually. You can hear the big influence that Kurt Cobain obviously had on a young Dave Grohl and his songwriting, because there are, like, half the songs do sound just like Nirvana songs, but there's some other stuff like this track which are a little more experimental and even show a bit of a Melvins influence, which maybe is why he picked this track, because musically it does sound a little like the Melvins. But on that album, Pocket Watch, this song is called Just Another Story About Skeeter Thompson. Skeeter Thompson was the bassist for Scream, that punk band that Dave Grohl was in before Nirvana. It's just Dave Grohl talking over this music, which is all just him again. It's just Dave Grohl playing all the guitars, bass, and drums on it. And it has a great beat, Dave Grohl's a great drummer, and it's not bad musically. You don't mind it as much on Pocket Watch. It's more like an interlude. It's like the end of the first side, and there are so many other songs on it, which are like proper songs, that you kind of, you're fine with it. But it's not that great of a story. Like, Dave's young, and he's, you could tell he's kind of young and kind of dumb, and even though very talented, you could tell, like, he thinks this story is very funny, and it's really not. It's a so anecdote. It's not that great of an anecdote about his bassist and how the punchlines just that his bassist showed him his penis. It's not really worthy of being put on an album, in my opinion. But then, in a truly baffling move, Buzz Osborne takes that track and makes it close out his solo EP. And they retitled it simply Skeeter. But it's the same track. I think it was remixed, but it's essentially the same track, and it's the same anecdote by Dave Grohl. And again, Buzz Osborne has nothing to do with it. He didn't play on this track. I understand it connects with Dave Grohl, who plays on the rest of this EP, but this isn't the King Buzzo Dave Grohl EP. It's the King Buzzo EP. So it seems kind of like a slapdash way to end this EP, which is really, really ironic considering what Buzz Osborne has said about Joe Preston and his EP. I mean, even if it was just some noisy guitar work, or just another avant-garde piece, or even a Buzz Osborne interview, over some feedback, all that would make more sense with it being the King Buzzo solo EP. It's funny because the 78 Gene Simmons solo album is also my least favorite. It's my least favorite of the Kiss solo albums because I think some of the stuff slapdash and a little half-ass on that, and there's some interesting experiments, but it doesn't all add up, but there's a few gems. Well, maybe that's what he was going for. Maybe he wanted this to be kind of flawed the way that Gene Simmons' solo album is flawed. But there's other things I think that this is truly an homage, is it starts off rocking with a track that sounds like a Melvins song, and that's just like the Gene Simmons solo album. Starts off rocking with Radioactive, and that's the song that sounds the most like a Kiss song on that album. But then it goes into a totally different kind of direction, and he starts doing different kinds of music. He doesn't do avant-garde music like Buzz does, but he does different stuff. He does disco-y sounding songs and a lot of Beatle-esque ballads, and that's the thing too. I feel like Enum is kind of like his See You Tonight. It's his way of doing a more melodic, ballady kind of song. And the Gene Simmons solo album had a lot of guest stars and very famous people playing with him. He had Bob Seger, he had Joe Perry, Donna Summer, and he had Cher did a phone call. So having Dave Grohl, who at least at this stage, in the underground alternative rock scene was a star, becoming a star, that kind of lines up with the Gene Simmons solo album as well. Maybe him telling the anecdote he thought was a little like Cher making a phone call on one of the songs on the Gene Simmons solo album. So I feel like there was some reason why he had Skeeter be the last track, and it probably had something to do with mirroring Gene Simmons' album, maybe in some way. Or maybe he just didn't have enough tracks in time and just slapped something on. I don't know. I still think it holds it back a bit. I mean, it's better than the Gene Simmons album, but it's not a perfect EP like the other two EPs. Yeah, so there you go. But still, I love the King Buzzo EP. But let's move on. Let's move on to my second favorite Melvins solo EP, and that is the Joe Preston EP. There we go. I gave Joe Preston the edge on Buzz Osborne. If you're watching this video, Buzz Osborne, apologies, sir. I think you're awesome, and you're one of my favorite people in rock music. So don't take that as any disrespect, because I have a pretty strong suspicion that you hate this guy. And I know you hate this EP. I feel like Buzz's hatred of Joe Preston clouds his judgment on this EP. But let's get into it. Okay, hey, I hated this at first too, so maybe Buzz just didn't listen to it enough. I needed to listen to it a few times before it finally clicked. I needed some bros on the YouTube comments saying, hey, you're not doing well by Joe. Listen to his fucking EP again. And I did. And I love it now. It's crazy. It's weird. It's obviously got really nothing to do with Kiss. And I think that bothered Buzz a bit because of the 3 EPs. This really, I guess Joe wasn't a Kiss fan. So there's really nothing here. I mean, short of the album artwork, which of course wasn't done by him, there's really nothing here that connects this to the concept that this is like an homage / parody of the Kiss solo albums. But it is, in one sense, it's really him recording on his own. Now, he was a bassist that was in a kind of doom sludgy band called Earth, which also collaborated with Kurt Cobain. And, these guys were all kind of collaborating and doing different things. And he was only in the Melvins for a very short period. But the one album he recorded with them, which is the album that came out after this release, is one of their strongest albums, Lysol. Oh, man, that's an awesome album. And one that I don't think I gushed over enough. So at some point in the future, I'm going to do a video that's just talking about Lysol because it deserves it. That album is a trippy sludge metal masterpiece. And this album, I think, showed that he had a little influence on the band, even though he was just a bassist, and the bassists usually don't have a big influence in the Melvins. They have a revolving door for bassists, and he wasn't in the band for a long time, but he happened to be the guy that was there when they were doing the solo EPs, and I think they lucked out because Joe Preston ended up being a guy that showed that, yeah, he could do things on his own. In fact, this is where he kind of defined himself as an underground kind of gonzo figure. This is essentially the first Thrones album. Thrones is a project of his where it's just him, and he made a lot of lo-fi, experimental, sludgy, weird gonzo metal songs that also had like a punk rock edge and a lot of drone stuff and also some experimental stuff and noise rock and some weird synthy things. There's a compilation called A Day Late, Dollar Short. If you're interested in hearing their different stuff, that comprises pretty much all their, I say their, it's just Joe. He made it seem like it was a band. But yeah, Day Late, Dollar Short has a lot of the underground singles and stuff that were all put together. I feel like that's kind of a mixed bag. It's all right. I like it. But the best thing I've heard from Thrones is actually another underground album that's only available on cassette, like the Dave Grohl one, is the very first self-titled Thrones demo, which was released in 1994 on Punk in My Vitamins Records. It's available on YouTube, and I've listened to it several times on YouTube. This guy made a great video where he shows the cassette in a lot of different trippy ways, so it's interesting visually, and the cassette has a really badass album cover while you're listening to it, and the sound quality is pretty good for an underground cassette. I'm going to leave a link down below to that too, so I definitely recommend checking out. I think that's the best thing that Thrones ever did, and this EP, because this EP pretty much sounds like the beginning of that Thrones demo. Maybe he was pushed into this situation because of Buzz Osborne, and as a result, he created his voice. He created his voice as an artist. And it begins with The Eagles Landed, which is like sound clips. This is like kind of like stuff that John Lennon and Yoko Ono were doing in the late 60s. Their experimental stuff, like Revolution 9, where it's playing with sound clips, and he has like some clips on some of the later songs from Apocalypse Now. It creates a little bit of a collage. What I like about The Eagles Landed, though, it's only like a minute and 58 seconds. You also hear some like old-timey kind of jazz music. It sounds like it's from some transistor radio from the past. It kind of sets up this kind of disconcerting vibe and atmosphere, like something's wrong here, and it only gets more wrong. The next track, Bricklebrit. Bricklebrit's where the music kind of kicks in. Now, some people might not think of this as music, but I think of this as music. He cited other band members playing on this, but I feel like they're just made up names. They're like Denial Fiend, Sally Green, and he gave them weird instruments to be playing. Like Denial Fiend is Hellish Crossfire on wooden coffins. So I don't know. It sounds like he's playing bass, like a fuzzy bass with distortion, which is one of his trademark sounds. It's like this really fat, thick, distorted, sludgy bass mixed in with some guitar, and it just kind of, when that sludgy bass and sludgy guitar, kind of like the sound of the band Crover, where it just kind of merges to one big, thick sound. The Melvins also sound a little like that as well. And that's on top of the drums, and it's kind of a heavier track. It's like definitely letting you know that this is very different. Even from the experimental second song on the King Buzzo EP, this is even less accessible than that. Like, this is like really aggressive music that's really a draw the line in the sand, kind of between the straights and the hip cats, you know? It's the next song, though. The next song is the masterwork on this EP, and that's the 22-minute, 58-second long drone metal masterwork, drone metal epic that is Hands First Flower. Whoa, Hands First Flower. Now, this is a song that I really got into and I've been listening to a lot this year. When that I think it's the bass, the distorted bass, but maybe there's also some guitar overlay. But that sound, it sounds like the beginning of the apocalypse, but I don't know, it's both ancient and futuristic. It's almost like that, the big black thing in 2001 Space Odyssey. Picture that as a sound. Dun, dun, dun. And it's so intense. For 20 minutes, essentially subtle variations. The sound kind of comes and goes, and it's kind of the thing that keeps this piece's shape. Different sounds come, different feedback, other noises come in and out. It's also a lot like some of the more experimental and challenging fusion pieces by Miles Davis, like around the Jack Johnson, Bitches Brew, Live Evil, Big Fun time period, where it's almost got an Eastern quality to it. Apparently, this is an early example of a subgenre of metal called drone metal, which I don't know too much about. But I am digging this shit, so I guess I should be listening to some drone metal. So I'll be getting into some more drone metal. And if some of you drone metal maniacs out there want to give me some recommendations, leave them down below in the comments section, because I'm into this shit. This song, it just blows me away now. I think it's awesome. This is it. I don't want to say anything against Buzz Osborne. He's one of my favorite people. He's awesome. So it's all due respect. And I understand why sometimes, if you have beef with someone and you really don't like this person, and it sounds like Buzz just didn't get along with Joe Preston. Maybe Joe Preston is an asshole. When you listen to the music, it sounds like, yeah, that's probably a guy who's probably an asshole. I don't know, but he sounds kind of like he's a mad genius asshole. I don't know who the asshole is. Maybe they both are. Maybe neither of them. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. I don't know. But the fact that Joe Preston didn't last long in the band, and the fact that Buzz Osborne says that this is the worst thing with the Melvins name on it. And he said that, he didn't take it seriously and he just did it in a day. I don't know. I disagree. Especially if you listen to the Throne stuff, it sounds like this is what Joe Preston liked to make. It sounded like he did take it seriously enough and did what he wanted to do. Doesn't matter if it's done in a day or two. I mean, Buzz Osborne's punk rock. Why does he care about that? The King Buzzo EP has stuff like Porg on it, and then Skeeter. So it's like, is he suddenly against avant-garde music? I mean, there are later Melvins albums like Prick and Hunky and Colossus of Destiny. So I can't imagine that this wouldn't musically be up Buzz's alley. I just feel like he's letting his personal beef with Joe Preston and his dislike of the guy is cloud his judgment on this EP that I think he would otherwise really think was cool and would appreciate it and see it as a perfect fit with the other two EPs and very distinct in a declaration of a artist as a solo artist. And in that sense, it does keep with the Kiss albums. If anything, this should be the green one. This should be the Peter Criss one. I understand Dale Crover had to be green because he's the drummer and Peter Criss was the drummer. But in my opinion, that album, which we'll be getting into, is more like the Ace Frehley album. And this is at very least like the Peter Criss album in the sense that it's like a total departure and a lot of people think it's the worst one. So in that way, it's like the Peter Criss one. But also, I don't think the Peter Criss is the worst Kiss solo album, and I don't think the Joe Preston EP is the worst Melvins EP. So there you go. Another connection. Look at all these connections I'm making. Anyway, I feel bad that in my beginner's guide, I was so dismissive of this EP. But I think I've made up for it now. If you love gonzo crazy, minimalistic fucking drone music, if you are someone that can actually get behind things like Revolution 9 and Metal Machine music and far out trancey repetitive vamps, jazz vamps and what have you. If you're into shit like that, well, fucking definitely check out the Joe Preston EP for 1992. And here we go. Yeah, I'm with the masses here. And by the masses, I mean the really awesome niche group of people that listen to the Melvins fucking solo EPs from 1992. Well, most of that really select awesome group of people, most of them say that the Dale Crover EP is the best of the Solo 92 Melvins EPs. And obviously, I agree with them. I always thought that, and I still think that. Even though my love for the other two has grown quite a bit, Dale still wins. Dale still has the best one, in my opinion. I love the Dale Crover EP. It's fucking awesome. And even though, yeah, he's got to mirror the Peter Criss album cover with the green because he's the drummer, this is really like the Ace Frehley solo album. Because the Ace Frehley solo album, most of the fans think that's the best one, and it's largely him playing most of the instruments, and it rocked the most. The Ace Frehley one was the most consistently hard rockin'. This, likewise, is the most consistently hard rockin'. It's pretty much all rock. There's no avant-garde noiseescapes. There's no drone stuff. It's rock music, but I would say it's grunge. It's grunge. It's very catchy grunge. It's very dark. If you like stuff like the Melvins, if you like stuff like Mudhoney, if you like stuff like early Nirvana, if you like maybe Dirt era Sonic Youth, well, if you like that kind of stuff, I think there's a good chance you'll like the Dale Crover EP from 1992. Now, Dale, he's a very talented man. In a lot of ways, he's like the underground David Grohl. Like David Grohl, he could play a lot of the instruments and he could do a lot of this himself. Apparently, I was so impressed when I found out not only is he playing the drums, he's playing all the guitar parts, and the guitar work is really, really great on this album. A lot of times it sounds just like what Buzz Osborne would have done, while also inserting a little bit of his own style as well. Very impressive. There is a bassist. He's not playing bass. The bass is a lady bassist by the name of Debbie Shane, and Debbie Shane does a really good job. I love early 90s lady bassists. They were the best. My favorite Melvins bassist is actually Lori Black. So this is like Dale's own Lori Black. Maybe he was dating her. I don't know. But anyway, she's playing bass and she's doing a great job. But that's it. She's the only other musician. Everything else is all Dale. He does all the lead vocals, all the guitars, and all the drums, and it's very, very impressive. I love the production on this too. Greg Freeman and Dale Crover produced this, and man, the sound, you hear it right out of the gate with Hex Me. Hex Me is just this like 1 minute, 14-second fucking jam, this grungy rock jam. I love the sound of the guitar, which is all kind of spacey and wild. The guitars are just so crunchy. And as much as I loved Isabella and the crunchy sound of those guitars, these guitars are even crunchier. I love me some crunchy guitars. And that's the thing. Even though this is much darker and heavier and not as mainstream as what Ace Frehley was doing, it has that crunch. You know, you could hear that like Ace Frehley, that Dale, maybe he likes some classic rock, that not only Kiss, maybe he likes some Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and early AC/DC, because it's grungy, but there's a rock crunch to it. And that's what I love. And that's my favorite grunge, always has that kind of crunch to it. And Hex Me is a great jam and a great way to open it up. And then it goes into Dead Wipe, the first proper song. Sounds very similar to the Melvins, but it sounds like a great Melvins song. Dale, you know, his vocals aren't quite as strong as Buzz's, but they're strong enough. You know, he does the job. They sound desperate and manic and intense. Dead Wipe's a really dark, intense fucking song. I love the sound of the bass and guitar. The thing that's similar to about all these EPs is that the guitars and bass kind of form this sludgy, unified sound. And I love a lot of the riffs, and it's a great rock tune. It's a great early 90s grunge song. And this is like real grunge. This isn't like MTV grunge. This is the real deal. I fucking love Dead Wipe. It's an awesome song. Respite, I think that's how you pronounce it, Respite. And Respite is a very dark, strange, again, kind of grungy song, but a little more experimental, although it's still a rock song. But it's a little darker and weird, has some weird guitar effects, and it's disconcerting. It's very disconcerting. Probably my least favorite of the 4 songs, but it's still great. And then my favorite track out of all these EPs, this is another reason why this is my favorite EP of the bunch, is Hunter. God damn, at 4 minutes and 22 seconds, it's a mini epic. Mini fucking rock epic. another grunge song, but this has shades of kind of dark proto-grunge from the 70s. A little bit of a Neil Young and Crazy Horse kind of vibe, especially the lead guitar work. Dale Crover's doing some really cool soloing, especially on that outro. There's this amazing outro that sounds a lot like something you would have heard on like a Zuma-era Neil Young album, you know, like Danger Bird or Cortez the Killer. It has that vibe to it. It has that vibe. And I love the sound of the bass. Debbie Shane's doing a damn good bass line on this song. That coda at the end, the way the drums kind of fall back, but they're still there, and the way the guitar floats around, and it's a dark, restless, nocturnal rock song befitting of the title Hunter. It sounds like something hunting, you know, it has a predatory nature, this song. It's just a great, dark, hard rock song. And that's the thing, grunge, you know, maybe it's a shade of hard rock, maybe it's a shade of punk, maybe it's a shade of metal. It's all in the stew. It's all in the stew. And if you love all those different kind of shades of rock music, you should definitely get behind a song like Hunter. Amazing song. In the same way that King Buzzo foreshadows later Melvins albums, and in the same way Joe Preston's EP foreshadowed some of the things he would do, especially in Thrones, the Dale Crover EP foreshadows what Dale Crover would do as his side project, which is a band called Altamont. Altamont is very similar to this style of music, and that was his side project. They've released a handful of albums over the decades, and I don't have any of them. But I need to get them. I sampled them. I listened to them on YouTube. A lot of the earlier ones are out of print. If you got copies of them, if you got like digital files or whatever, tell me about it in the comments section, all right? Also, if you got that Thrones cassette, if anyone has a digital file of that Thrones cassette, self-titled demo, put that in the comments too. We'll figure it out. Somehow through Dropbox or an email, somehow hook me up, all right? And I definitely would love to get all the Altamont albums from listening to them. They're all pretty good. And hell, I mean, they're pretty much like album versions of this EP. And this EP is one of my favorite releases from the Melvins. So there you go. And it's all just Dale Crover. So awesome job, Mr. Crover. You are a highly talented fucking rock and roller. This is definitely the most rock and roll of the 3 EPs. So again, that's why it's like the Ace Frehley solo album and why it should be blue instead of green. Lori Black had cleaned up for like a year, and you know they could have done an EP with her and she could have been Paul Stanley. You know, a lady being Paul Stanley would have made sense. But they didn't do that. They didn't do that. So we just had the 3. Highly recommend the Dale Crover EP, my favorite of the Melvin EPs. And I recommend all 3 of these. In fact, I think the 3 of them all work really well together. You know, if you listen to them all in a row, I would actually recommend listening, starting with King Buzzo, then listening to Dale Crover, and saving Joe Preston for the end. Because Hands First Fire really is like the end. It sounds like the beginning and end of the world. It's like dark matter. That has to end it. And I definitely think Isabella should open it. And Dale Crover is like that solid rock in the middle. He's the solid rock in the center, you know, holding it together. That's my recommendation on how to listen to these EPs. King Buzzo, Dale Crover, then Joe Preston. This is great, experimental, innovative, exciting, gonzo, rock and roll music. Yeah, and I fucking love it. And now I've given these EPs their just dues so I can sleep at night. I can sleep at night knowing that I gave the 1992 Melvin solo EPs a fair shake. So there you go, Melvins fans. If you like this video, actually click like. It helps me with the algorithm, and you'll see more content like this if YouTube is throwing it at you. Plus, subscribe to my channel. There's going to be other Melvins videos like this one in the future, and other cool groovy curveballs that I always like to throw at people because I have very eclectic taste in music. Also, if you're interested in the actual Kiss solo albums that inspired these EPs, just last week, I posted a podcast episode from my podcast, the Rock Overview Podcast, where me and my co-host, Eric Jordan RMCP, had Sinkin' Stanley. That's right, Sinkin' Stanley, who's the thorn in Paul Stanley's side. He came on and we had a really fun 2-hour chat about the 78 solo albums. And I'm going to leave a link down below to that as well. So there you go. It's a Linkpalooza down there. I am Eddie Canestracci. I love the Melvins. I love rock and roll. And I love you for watching this long video about the 3 solo Melvins EPs from 1992. What a year of music. And it's still with us now to listen and rock out to. Thanks again for watching, and rock on.